welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I am your host, Jessica, and I am here with the author of CORA ZENG, Bad Eater, and Other Names for CORA ZENG. That's the title, correct?
It is. It's a long title. Yes,
It's
you're
a long
correct.
title, but it is a very ear-catching title, and I really loved it in a way that it made me, I don't want to use the word nostalgic because it's not nostalgic, but it's horror. First of all, let's get that
Sure is.
let's get that right out the door. But it really it captured that weird feeling, like right as everything was shutting down with COVID, but it also deals with some really serious topics. And again, like nostalgic is the wrong word for it, but when I started reading it, I just got a memory of just how weirdly quiet everything was.
Yeah,
Like,
bad nostalgia, the kind you don't want to go back to.
Yeah, but like even if you were locked up in your own house, like everything was just blanketed in this strange silence.
Yes,
I
very
don't,
surreal.
yeah, isolation, I think. If isolation had a sound, it would be whatever was evoked in the beginning of this book.
Yeah.
But it's such a timepiece and it has so much to say. Yeah, so please introduce yourself. Tell us about this book. And I mean, I don't really need to imagine where it came from, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, to me, it's fairly obvious. But for you, if you would like to discuss a little bit about how this story came to be for you.
Sure. So first of all, I'm Kylie Lee Baker. Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm a young adult and now adult. This is my adult debut author of very dark books, fantasy and horror. And Bat Eater and Other Names for CORA ZENG is a horror novel that takes place at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic in New York City's Chinatown, when a crime scene cleaner named Cora witnesses her sister being killed in a hate crime. And then a few months later, at her crime scene cleanup, she starts to notice a serial killer targeting Asian women and also some Chinese hungry ghosts. And then both the killer and the ghosts start drawing uncomfortably close to her. And as you might expect, I started drafting this book in the earlier days of the pandemic. I want to say around 2021. So it was definitely drawn from a lot of the anti-Asian hate that was increasing at the time, as well as just my desire to write about Chinese folklore in a contemporary setting, because around that time I also read about hungry ghosts in Chinese culture, and I found out about these needle neck ghosts that are, as you might imagine, just ghosts with very long, thin necks that's supposed to prevent them from eating food. And it was just such a horrifying visual that I needed to make it everyone else's problem. I needed everyone else in the world to suffer with me. So I wrote a book about it.
I found everything about this book 100% compelling, and
Oh, thank you.
you know, as a white girl from Long Island, we do have a very large Asian community. I've heard the term hungry ghosts before, but it wasn't until somewhat recently, when I was connecting with a friend who actually lives she's Chinese and she lives in Malaysia, that I actually found out about, like, is it like a month, the hungry ghosts? Yeah, that I found out that existed. So it takes place around, like the majority of the horrible things, or at least that part of it, takes place during this time. So I don't know if you want to talk just a little bit about what that whole time period is.
Yeah, so the Hungry Ghost Festival is Chinese Buddhist and just generally Chinese folkloric tradition that takes place, as you said, not just in China, but in many other Asian countries that have some sort of Chinese influence, like Malaysia and Singapore. And it is I always get this wrong, the seventh or eighth lunar month of the year, which is different from the calendar year, but it's around August approximately every year. And the idea is that the gates of hell open up and all the dead can come to the land of the living, and the living are obligated to honor their ancestors with some sort of offering, whether it's food or people often burn joss paper or a special type of money that's used only for the dead. And then at the end of the month, hopefully they're satisfied with all the offerings and they go back to hell. So that's when this story takes place.
I mean, there really was, I think, so much of a perfect storm for how a story which is a horror story um that takes place during COVID would align with that. So again, the first scene I is intense.
It is.
It's intense. Folks,
Sure is.
you're gonna read this book. Once again, I will tell you, it is horror for a reason. But as you mentioned, Horace's sister, Delilah, dies quite violently in a hate crime.
Mhm.
And you learn a lot about Cora in that very first, those first few pages. You learn that they're half sisters. You learn Cora, she has a white mother. Her father lives in China, and like she kind of is sort of in the middle of everything. And I really just felt for her in the way that like she really did kind of feel like she herself was on the precipice of trying to figure out where she belonged. And then, of
Mhm.
course, COVID happens, and no matter what, like nothing matters anymore. It
Yes.
doesn't matter what you worked for in school, it doesn't matter whatever your survival is based on whether or not you can find toilet paper and food. And she loses like her only connection, even though she and Delilah, you can tell in the beginning, have a relationship that's maybe not the most fulfilling or healthy or,
Yes.
connective. But one thing I thought was interesting was sort of that internal fight with Cora between where she belongs. She has two aunts. She has her Chinese aunt and she has her white American aunt. One wants her to be super Christian. The other one is not like that, but has, connections to um, you know, uh, Chinese culture and the
Mhm.
background. And the whole idea that she is a crime scene cleaner was also very interesting because I actually did not find out that this was a thing until around COVID myself, when my coworker who was sitting next to me fully masked mentioned that she had a family member who did this. So I didn't actually know that that was a job. So how did you find out about that?
I came across a YouTube video several years prior, just interviewing someone who worked as a crime scene cleaner. And prior to that, I had never heard of that job either. But I thought it was so interesting because it's one of those things that has to get done, but no one really thinks about it. And even though it is such a gruesome job, it really does help people. So it is an important job, but just one that most people don't like to think too hard about or to look at, which I think worked really well for this book because a recurring theme is that there's so many horrible things in the world that some people don't have the option to look away from just because it makes them uncomfortable. So Cora is confronting those things both because she is Chinese American and also as a crime scene cleaner. And I think she's very drawn to that sort of gruesomeness in the way that I think a lot of people are drawn to their trauma, even if it doesn't really make sense. You would think they would want to stay away, but that's often not what happens in reality.
So as the serial killer begins to become more prominent and she begins to start to see ghosts more, or what she thinks, is a very specific ghost, whether or not it fits is a whole other story altogether. But she's also getting to know her two co-workers, Harvey and Zafei, is it?
Ife.
Ife, I'm sorry,
No, no,
Harvey.
it's okay. I had to think about it for a second. It's been a while since I
Yeah,
read this
yeah,
book.
I'm like looking, I'm like, did I write that down wrong? Excuse me, Harvey and Ife.
Yeah.
And they both have very different backgrounds as Chinese, Chinese Americans or Chinese immigrants.
Mhm.
And I found that to be such an interesting thread between Cora trying to find her identity between these two sides of her family, and then connecting with these coworkers who they share something, but but they're very different, and almost like it felt very real because I feel like we did form a lot of interesting connections during that time period. And here she is working with these two people in hazmat suits, and she's starting to really find parts of herself. Um, in regards to how Cora was going to form these connections while all these horrible things were happening, were those characters always part of the script?
Yes. When I was thinking of what sort of characters I wanted to be in the story, what I was aiming for this time around, as compared to my other books, was a group of friends that really just accept Cora for who she is. And for context, I've written four other young adult books, and they all, like this book, feature a biracial protagonist because I'm also biracial and I have a lot of things to say about that. Though I've increasingly, or rather decreasingly, focused on the biracial experience in my books. I'm reaching a point where I feel like there's not as much that I haven't already said that needs to be said. And I don't always want that to be the focus of every story. Sometimes I think I just want to write a biracial character going on adventures or doing things that are not directly related to that part of her identity. And so this group of friends within this group, it's never really an issue. They just accept her as being Chinese American, which is how she identifies and how she wants to be seen. And that's just not a conflict for her. She has so many other things going on. And that's not the case in my other books. So it was very nice to have that representation here because I'm so fortunate that that's been my experience with a lot of my friends, in that I just get accepted with the identity that is most important to me, that I want to project into the world. And so that's really what I wanted above all else with Harvey and Ife, but also they needed to be a little bit strange. I mean, I don't want to say that everyone who's a crime scene cleaner is strange, especially since you know someone personally who does it. Though I will say I
Oh,
don't think
it's their family member. I've
Oh,
never
okay.
met their family
Okay,
member.
okay.
He just happens to say, "Oh, so and so is a crime scene cleaner."
Gotcha.
I was like, "Oh my goodness, that's a
Yeah.
thing."
Yeah, I mean, I do think, and if any crime scene cleaners disagree with me, feel free to send me an email. But I do think no one ends up in that career by accident. I feel like you probably have a reason that that is your career, as opposed to doing something else less traumatizing. So they needed to have pretty interesting backstories for their presence to make sense in that context, which is why they're both a little bit weird.
I appreciate that. I think like one thing that a lot of us get in stories about adults that you don't get as much with YA, and this is again why I think that, it's nice to see these things coming into adult books, is that like you're kind of supposed to feel like the adult experience is that you've already figured it all out, and you absolutely haven't.
Mhm.
I honestly don't know that anybody ever 100% figures it out, because even when they do, something is always lurking in the back to smack them in the back of the head, like COVID.
Yes.
For
Especially in
instance.
COVID times. I was a little bit older than Cora at the time of the pandemic, but I can't imagine kids just graduating college in 2020 and trying to figure out what to do with their lives when the world is in shambles.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I think, I mean, that's something that is still being felt.
Hmm.
I had kindergartners during COVID.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I mean, everyone's experience is just forever shaken, but I do think there is something to be said for having adult characters that just are like, yeah, no, I have no idea. I have no idea. Everything is kind of a mess and I feel messy, and that's okay because
Yeah.
this is, this is how it is. But I really appreciated just, kind of going back to, and I know this wasn't the focus of Cora's character, but just appreciated how she was sort of dipping the toe in both ants'
Hmm.
cultures. It was upsetting how much her white aunt was just almost like wanting to erase the Asian part of Cora,
Hmm.
even though she couldn't, to the fact that to the point that like she'd make bigoted comments in front of her and insult her in front of other people. And she had to know she was doing it. I
Hmm.
mean, but at the same time, like kind of like being like, well, I can do it because she's also half this. And that was really upsetting, but it kind of like added to the real world part of the horror. And I do think that that's something that made this book particularly effective, was that even if you don't remember certain things from COVID, everybody's like, oh, we all came together and sang Kumbaya. No, like I remember also having a front row seat to some of the most awful hate crimes I've ever seen broadcast. And I think that there was, you know, something in that was ripe for the picking, specifically.
Yeah, no, definitely pushed on a lot of pressure points for people. I think it's just another example of when people are scared of something, they try to find someone to blame for it, whether or not that's justified.
Was there anything that surprised you while you were writing the book? Did you have everything plotted out specifically, or did you follow the sort of flow of the story?
I had a pretty good idea of what it was going to be before I started writing. This is one of my more linear stories, and I think that's because I tried to follow a very standard horror movie structure because I'm a big fan of horror movies, and that tends to follow similar patterns, sort of like rom-coms. People expect certain beats at certain points. So at least for my first horror novel, I thought, okay, I'm gonna do it this way and play it safe. And so it was actually one of the easier novels to write just because it all unfolded very organically.
So does this mean you're going to write more horror?
Oh yeah, I have another adult horror coming out next year. It's not a secret, but we don't know what it's going to be called or anything like that yet. But that one is definitely not linear. It's dual POV, dual timeline. I felt like after I did this one, I was like, okay, now let's have fun. Let's do something dangerous.
I'm excited. What is it very different for you writing for adults versus YA?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the biggest difference and perhaps greatest joy in writing this book was that I didn't have to hold back with all the darkness because even though I write YA, I would say my YA books are on the upper ends. They're already quite dark. People often describe them as gruesome. They're definitely dark horror. I'm dark fantasy rather. Um, but there were multiple times when my very knowledgeable editors would say, Kylie, remember this is for children. Maybe we should reel it in a little bit. And they're correct. Like I totally understand where they're coming from. But for my first horror, I didn't want anyone to be able to tell me that. And that was why I was so excited to just go as far as I wanted in this one. Though before I scare anyone off, I do want to say that I believe there is such a thing as tasteful gore, and everything in this book is, in terms of the gore, the horror, the violence at least, is there for a reason. And it's not just to gross you out or to shock you. It's to make a certain point about the world and how awful it can be and to make people force people to look at something that they often wouldn't want to because some people don't have the choice to look away. So this is not like a splatterpunk book, just to be clear. It's
It's
just a
not,
little bit
no, it's
darker.
not. It's
Yeah.
not, and it was really well done. And
Oh,
it
thank
did
you.
feel very much like a classic horror
Oh,
movie.
thank you.
Yeah, no, and I feel like if I was to elaborate on that, it would give too much away. But I do feel like there was that. And it was really, really good. I
Thank
really
you.
liked it. It did not disappoint. I think the only thing that disappoints is sometimes the world. Sometimes
Yes,
is
exactly.
that. Sometimes we hope we will all end up on pandemics in a better place, and sometimes, we end up otherwise.
Yes,
But as
exactly.
in regards to this story, I think people will be very satisfied as a whole with
I
this
hope
arc and
so.
with Cora's arc, and I really appreciated it. Thank
Well,
you
thank
so
you.
much for chatting with us about
Oh,
it.
no, thank you for having me.
Are you a librarian?
I was.
Yeah, you were. I remember,
Yeah.
I read your bio.
Yeah, no, not anymore. I worked at a public library for a while, and then I worked in archives for a little bit after that. But right now I'm writing full time. But I do miss my library days. I think about them often. I had wonderful coworkers in both the libraries I worked at, and I think libraries are such magical, special places that are so important to the community. So I do think about that sometimes. Think, oh, wouldn't it be nice if I went back?
Well, you can always visit.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, thanks once again. This was Jessica with Syosset Libraries Turn the Page podcast. Our guest was,
Kylie Lee Baker.
and we are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.